As many of you know, the third season of Star Trek nearly didn't happen. NBC didn't want to give it another season, so upon hearing about this, many fans organized a letter-writing campaign to pressure the network to keep the show on the air. Edward Gross and Mark Altman, authors of The 50-Year Mission, explained that, in so many ways, Star Trek was a standout compared to the rest of the shows being broadcast by the networks. But insofar as NBC was concerned, the show was more trouble than it was worth. Not only was there a continuing series of battles with Gene Roddenberry regarding content, but the series was not a ratings powerhouse. Indeed, it seemed that Season 2 could very well be the show's last. The only hope would be if the word could somehow get out to the fans, a challenge made more difficult by the fact that Harlan Ellison, who by this time had had a major falling out with Roddenberry over the script for The City on the Edge of Forever, would not throw his support behind such a campaign. The show's future was strictly in the hands of the fans. The reaction to the news about the cancellation among Trekkers was based on knowledge of the television business model. If we didn't have a full 3 seasons of a show, there would be no syndication reruns. This was pre-video recorders in every home. Without a third season, we would lose it all forever. The reaction was panic. They got about 50,000 letters for the year on everything. But the Star Trek campaign generated 1 million letters. They were handling the mail with shovels. They didn't know what to do with it. So they made an unprecedented on-air announcement that they were not canceling the show and that it would be back in the fall. NBC moved Star Trek to a Friday night time slot for the third season when far fewer people are watching TV. Gene Roddenberry decided to quit over this, and his absence may be one of the reasons the third season is seen by many as the worst season. David Gerrold said, Roddenberry, rather than try and do the very best show possible, walked away and picked Fred Freiberger. If he was there would have been some of that stuff that was there in the beginning. When the show first started, there was a lot of really nice stuff there that you wanted to see developed. The show's budget was also drastically cut. Forget about what the actual numbers are, but in those days, in the first season, each show cost $193,500. That was good money in those days. The second season was $187,500. The third season was $178,500. So that was an enormous drop. The studio had deficit financing situations, and every time you shot a show, you lost more money. In those days, they didn't think they had a chance of syndication, especially since everybody knew the third season was it. You went from $193,500 per episode to $178,000, so you lose $15,000 per episode, but you lost more than that because some of the stars got raises, and that came out of the budget. So if you think about it, the fact that they got maybe half of a good season is lucky. This is one of the goofier, more B-movie-esque episodes of Star Trek. Aliens steal Spock's brain and use his autonomic nervous system to operate a computer that controls their planet's functions. This was also one of the least popular episodes among the cast. David Gerrold said, I suspect that Spock's brain was Gene L. Coon's way of thumbing his nose at Roddenberry or something. If not Roddenberry, he was thumbing his nose at how seriously the show was taking itself. The Enterprise enters the neutral zone, and Kirk and Spock board a Romulan ship where Kirk is put in the brig for ordering the ship to approach Romulan space, and the Romulan commander tries to seduce Spock and manipulate him into abandoning Starfleet. McCoy takes Kirk back to the Enterprise after Kirk and Spock conspire to fake his death. He disguises him as a Romulan and sends him back to the Romulan ship to steal a cloaking device. The Romulans also make arrangements to give cloaking technology to the Klingons. There's a planet inhabited by Native Americans that's about to be hit by an asteroid which the Enterprise has to divert. Kirk falls through a trapdoor built into an obelisk and ends up with amnesia. The inhabitants of the planet think that he is a god because he knows CPR. Spock speculates that the obelisk is a deflector that has been protecting the planet from collisions but has recently failed. Spock uses a mind meld to cure Kirk's amnesia, and Kirk figures out how to reactivate the obelisk. Apparently, the inhabitants were transferred to the planet by aliens called the Preservers, who also built the obelisk. The Preservers may also be responsible for filling the galaxy with so many humanoid races. This is another episode in which the Enterprise finds a planet inhabited by unsupervised children. A weird floating head has given the children the ability to control adults' minds and attempts to use the children to steal the Enterprise and conquer other planets. Medusans are a species so ugly that they have to be carried around in little boxes, and anyone who looks at a Medusan will go insane. Even Spock can only safely look at Medusans while wearing a visor. Diana Muldaur, who played Dr. Mulhall in Season 2 and would later play Dr. Pulaski in TNG, plays Dr. Miranda Jones, a telepath who wants to link minds with it. Larry Marvick, one of the designers of the Enterprise, is in love with Dr. Jones and jealous of her commitment to the Medusan ambassador and tries to murder him. He ends up looking at the ambassador and going insane. Marvick goes to engineering and steers the Enterprise outside of the galaxy, where it gets lost and the crew can only get back with the navigational help of the Medusan ambassador. Some aliens send the crew to a simulation of the Old West and force them to recreate the shootout at the OK Corral. This is another one of those episodes with a planet that looks like some period from Earth's history. Spock finds a way to fight the Earps without killing anyone, and the Malkotian who sent them to the planet is impressed. Kirk explains that peaceful resolution is how humans do things, which is weirdly incongruent with the fuss he made when the Organians wouldn't let him fight the Klingons in Errand of Mercy. The Enterprise responds to a distress call coming from a planet that appears to be uninhabited. When they beam down to the planet, they find Kang and some of his crew. Spock beams the Klingons up to the Enterprise without their weapons. A whirly energy alien takes control of the Enterprise and sends it toward the edge of the galaxy. It makes swords magically appear, so the Klingons and the crew all start sword fighting. Also, there's a lady Klingon in this one. Chekhov attacks her, so Kirk has to smack him around and teach him some respect. Turns out the whirly energy alien has been giving them paranoid delusions about the Klingons because it feeds on emotional hatred. Dr. McCoy reveals that he has 1 year to live. The crew discovers a ship that looks like an asteroid inhabited by people who think they're on a planet. The inhabitants are very religious and obey an oracle which tries to hide from them the fact that they are on a ship rather than a planet. The planet's high priestess falls in love with McCoy, and he figures that since he only has a year to live, he might as well stay. Conveniently, the ship's archives contain a cure for McCoy's disease, and he returns to the Enterprise. The Enterprise is on a mission to find the missing USS Defiant. There's some kind of disturbance in the space-time continuum that causes the ship to fade in and out of our universe. Scotty is able to beam most of the away team back, but Kirk seems stuck between dimensions and disappears along with the whole Defiant. Spock believes that the ship could reappear, but while they are waiting, a Tholian ship appears. Tholians are these awesome silicon-based life forms that look like giant crystals. The Tholians tell the Enterprise to leave their region of space. Spock explains that they'll leave in a couple of hours when they expect Kirk to reappear. After their time is up and Kirk doesn't reappear, the Tholians surround the ship with this energy web that will destroy the Enterprise upon completion. Spock takes a gamble on navigating into the spatial disturbance, and it ends up sending the ship well outside of Tholian space, and they are able to successfully retrieve the captain. This, I think, is by far the goofiest episode of the original series. The Enterprise answers a distress call from a planet filled with people who have preserved ancient Greek culture and who mostly have telekinetic powers. Their leader is ill, so McCoy cures him. Then they decide they want McCoy to stay on the planet permanently. The crew is not so keen on this idea, so they use their powers to force Kirk to do all kinds of goofy stuff like this. They essentially tell McCoy that if he doesn't agree to stay on the planet, they'll continue to force him to watch Shatner overact. This episode is also famous for the scene in which Kirk kisses Uhura. The producers didn't like this because they were afraid Southerners would be angry about it. They discover that the planet's food is what gives the inhabitants their powers, so McCoy injects Kirk with a serum that gives him the same powers so he can defend himself. The Enterprise finds people who can move far more quickly than everyone else. They move so quickly, in fact, that they can't be seen when they're around, and the only noise they make is a high-pitched buzzing. I thought this was kind of weird because if a person's voice were sped up that fast, it wouldn't sound like buzzing. Every sentence they spoke would sound like a click rather than a buzz. Anyway, the fast people put something in Kirk's coffee to make him move really quickly too, and from the crew's perspective, he disappears. Spock finds that the coffee has been spiked, and he takes the same drug, finds Kirk, and administers an antidote. The crew beams down to a planet whose star is about to go supernova, and Kirk is attacked. They meet a woman who is able to absorb other people's injuries, and she heals Kirk. Kirk and the woman are taken prisoner, and they inflict pain upon Kirk to test whether the woman would sacrifice herself for him. If she does, the aliens holding Kirk will save the rest of the planet from the supernova. Two warring planets agree to a marriage between a man from one planet and a woman from another. The problem is that Elon, the woman to be married, is not very keen on this arrangement. These planets are in a star system near the Klingon Empire, so if the Federation can help broker a peace between them, it might persuade them to ally with the Federation rather than the Klingons. Also, the women from Elon's planet have tears that make you fall in love with them if they touch your skin. Predictably, Elon gets her tears all over Kirk. Although the effect of these tears is supposed to be irresistible, Kirk manages to resist them because, as Scotty explains, he's already in love with the Enterprise. The Enterprise delivers medicine to a planet that functions as an insane asylum and are tricked and trapped on the planet by Garth of Izar, a former starship captain and inmate. Aliens taught him how to shapeshift, which is how he was able to trick the crew. Garth takes Kirk's form and asks Scotty to beam him up to the Enterprise. Wisely, Kirk told Scotty not to beam anyone up unless they knew a password. Since Garth didn't know that password, Scotty wouldn't beam him up, and Shatner does some of his signature Shatner acting. Garth tries to get an Orion lady to seduce the password out of Kirk, but Spock put the kibosh on that. He then takes Spock's form and tries to trick Kirk into revealing the password. But Kirk sees through this and asks Spock to give out the password, which he can't do because he's really Garth. Spock manages to obtain a weapon, so Garth disguises himself as Kirk. One of the two Kirks asks Spock to stun them both, and Spock figures out that this is something Kirk would really suggest, so he stuns the other Kirk. This episode is the most thinly veiled political metaphor ever to appear on screen until the movie They Live. Two people come aboard the Enterprise from a planet inhabited by people, half of whom are white on the left side of their bodies and black on the right side, and half of whom are the other way around. These folks don't get along because one group of people has historically mistreated the other group. Kirk, despite how obvious this allegory should be to everyone, additionally notes that these folks are from the southern region of the galaxy. The Federation wants to induct the planet Gideon, a planet without harmful microbes whose inhabitants live very long lives. Kirk tries to beam down to the planet, but ends up on a replica of the Enterprise with a woman from the planet. It turns out the planet is overpopulated, so they take a virus from Kirk's body and infect this woman with it in order to test whether it can be used to thin out the population. The Enterprise finds a planet that is geologically unusual, so they beam down with the ship's geologists to take a look. They find a woman on the planet who can kill people by touching them, and it turns out she's part of a computer-controlled planetary defense system left behind by an extinct civilization. Memory Alpha is a planet that houses a computer which contains all knowledge that the Federation has accumulated. The Enterprise is on its way to this planet and encounters an energy storm that affects the crew's nervous system, partially paralyzing them in various ways. Scotty has the feels for this one girl who is almost completely knocked out by the effects of the storm. Some of the crew beams down to Memory Alpha and find that the personnel has also been affected by the storm. Mira, the lady Scotty likes, had a premonition that they had all died, and she is shocked to discover that this is exactly what has happened. Kirk decides that the energy storm is conscious and decides to fire the ship's weapons at it. Mira responds in pain as though the attack is affecting her, and they figured the energy storm is trying to possess her body. It turns out that the energy storm was made of several beings which evolved beyond the need for a physical body, and they managed to drive it out of Mira by putting her in a hyperbaric chamber. The crew has caught a bad case of Rigelian fever. They go to a planet that has ingredients for a cure and are attacked by another one of those robots in a string that Star Trek loves to use so much. Some guy who lives on the planet tells them to leave. They explain their situation and he lets them get what they need. He takes them to his place that has all these recreations of Earth artifacts. He introduces them to a lady who takes a liking to Spock, and Spock plays a waltz while she dances with Kirk. The sheet music is supposedly by Brahms, but is not a Brahms song known to Spock. They get the minerals they need, but they're contaminated. Kirk gets a little too close to Reyna, the lady on the planet, and the robot attacks him again, so Spock takes it out with a phaser. Kirk falls in love with her, but it turns out she's a robot. It also turns out that the guy on the planet is super old and actually is Brahms, along with several other historical figures. This is the one with the space hippies. Spock gets his Vulcan harp and jams with them. They want to be taken to a planet they call Eden and are generally uncooperative with the crew except for Spock, who gets along with them. They eventually get to this planet, but it turns out all of the plants are made out of acid and Charles Napier eats one and dies. The Enterprise goes to a planet to find another ingredient for another medicine. This planet has a floating city that totally wasn't later ripped off by Star Wars, but Kirk decides to beam down to the surface, where he is attacked by the people who mine the minerals he needs. He's saved by the people who live in the Cloud City, and they take him there. The people who live in the Cloud City economically exploit the ones living on the surface. A woman from the surface sneaks onto the Cloud City and tries to take Kirk hostage. The Cloud people interrogate her, but Kirk orders them to stop. It turns out the mines are filled with a gas that make people go a little crazy, and Kirk gives them gas masks in exchange for the minerals. The crew beams down to a planet where they find recreations of various historical figures. Kirk sees Lincoln and Spock sees Sirach, and later some evil historical figures show up. Colonel Green appears, who was presumably a leader of one of the factions in World War III or the Eugenics Wars. And this is also the first appearance of the Klingon Kahless. He appears to have been affected by the augment virus that made the Klingons of Kirk's day look a lot more human. But perhaps this is because the aliens on the planet who made these situations were drawing information from what the crew thought they would be like. Anyway, the aliens on the planet want the crew and the good historical figures to fight with the bad historical figures. The Enterprise goes to a planet where a guy has a time portal, and when Kirk goes through it, he finds himself in what looks like 17th century England. Spock and McCoy go back 5,000 years to the planet's last ice age. Kirk is accused of being a witch, and it turns out that people who go through the portal can only survive a little while if they haven't been properly prepared. Spock doesn't want to return to the future because he found a girl he likes in a cave somewhere, and also because his biology is reverting back to that of ancient, less logical Vulcans. Kirk switches bodies with his ex-girlfriend Janice Lester, who tries to take over the ship. The crew becomes suspicious of Kirk's behavior, and McCoy orders a medical examination. Kirk, now in Lester's body, manages to convince Spock that he is who he says he is by asking Spock to do a mind meld. The crew decides to mutiny against the person posing as Kirk, and eventually Lester and Kirk revert to their original bodies. So that was the third season of Star Trek's original series. Next, I'll be doing a retrospective of the first season of Star Trek: The Next Generation.